Well, welcome to another screencast. This time we're going to look at making a pop-up blocks of information from footnotes, and we'll also have a look at an image as well. But this time it's a slightly different approach from the previous screencast where we made a button appear with text on the top of it. Now we're going to do something similar, but this time we're going to use an animation technique from InDesign to bring this piece of information up onto the screen. So as before, we want to do first of all use our script to move the footnotes to the end of the document, and then of course we do what we did before, but we're going to actually copy this first piece of text and then make that into a button on this page here. Where is it? This one here. So we're going to make this a button down here, paste the text into here, and we're going to make that into a particular object style, which we're going to call a pop-up, for no reason other than that it is going to be a pop-up, like so. And we're also, as before, going to give this a solid white background with a stroke of black, but with a very thin stroke. So we'll just make that into a 0.25 line, make it slightly smaller. Okay, and then this is my object style, so I actually want to redefine the style to be that. Now we're going to also take this object and put it, as before, onto a new layer. And this is my new layer here. So I'm going to paste that object into that particular place. In fact, we'll make this into a different color, make it really stand out a little bit more. Okay, that's better. Okay, it's obviously not quite in the right layer, so I'm just going to take that out again and put it into the correct layer. Okay, that's better. So now this object is going to be popping up somewhere over here when it appears. However, as before, we want to make some kind of button to enact that. But let's first of all create that into a button itself. And now that is a button, and the action on that button is that it's going to hide itself. So we put a line through the eye, and we're also going to make sure it's hidden until triggered, like this. Now we're also going to now create a new button. So I'm simply going to use my image from before, and we'll just resize that. Resize it to be quite small and put it onto the correct layer. Okay, and we'll have it over here maybe. Let's just move this out of the way temporarily. We actually just want to anchor this. We're going to anchor it to this point here where the reference number is. And we also want to make sure that that anchored object is set to be custom, so rather than inline. And as you can see, that's now correctly positioned over here. So this object here now needs to become a button. Now, before we actually do this, what we actually need to do now is to take this object here, which is going to pop up over here. We want to make this object animate onto the screen rather than just appear on the screen. So we have to make an animation at this stage, So we go to our interactive animation panel. Let's bring this onto the screen. This button 1 here, we're going to turn that into an animation. What kind of animation? Well, we're going to make it fly in from the left, like so. And that animation is now going to would actually normally just work as we appeared onto this, came onto this page, but we don't want to do that. But that's all right. We'll get rid of that in a moment. Now this button here, which isn't a button yet, but we're going to make it into a button. This button has to have an action, and that action this time is to animate or to invoke the animation called the animation on button 1. Okay, so that's going to happen. So when we click on that, that animation is going to be invoked. There are a couple of other things that we want to do. First of all, let's go back to this button again. And this button here, we want to make sure that this button hides itself and that it is also hidden until triggered. Okay, let's make sure that that's going to do that. So we want to also, with this object, we want to make sure it's hidden until animated. Right, let's see if that now is going to work for us with our interactive preview. Now, as you can see, that appeared straight away. It does work, but we don't want that to appear when we come to the page. So what we have to do is to go back to the animation, and we want to make sure that in this part here, where it says events, we want to turn off on page load. Okay, so there are a number of other things that we might want to do. For example, this text box that we've got here, I think it would look a little bit nicer if this was set to have under the text frame options. We might put a little bit of space around the object, or I should say around the text, so that it's not too tight. We need to make it a little bit bigger now. That's going to look a little bit nicer. And the other thing we could do is under the effects, shadow or outer glow. And this outer glow will be just set up to be normal, but rather than a white outer glow, it's going to be black. Like that. Okay, now let's see if this looks like. Okay, here's our preview window. On comes the animated pop out, pop on, whatever you want to call it, and we click to remove it. Now we can do further work on this to make sure that there's something that overlays the whole screen as well, or the whole screen in the ebook to make that object disappear. But I think that's enough for the moment. We're just going to very quickly move on to a page with an image on it, and we want to do something similar for this. I'm just going to bring this down here and get some of these menu items out of the way. Okay, now for this one, we want to make sure that this image is large enough to do the enlargement. So we're going to make a copy of that object, and we're going to go onto the layers and move on to this other layer, and we're going to paste that object onto that other layer. Now we want to make sure that we turn off the text wrap for this, so that it doesn't affect the image. But this needs to be, as I say, the image itself needs to be high enough resolution to have two possible views: a small view, like a sort of thumbnail, if you like, on the screen, and also this large view. Now this large view here is also got to be made into a button, so that when we click it, it can actually be hidden. So I'm going to now turn this button 3 off like this, make sure it's hidden until triggered as well. And we also want to make this object into an animated object. And we do this, we can make it just fade up, or we can do all sorts of things to this. But as you can see, there are lots of different default actions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this fly in from the left. No, I'm not. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to fly it in from the right, because that's where the image is nearer to the right hand side. And I'm now going to go back to my original image, but as you can see, I can't actually find it because it's hidden away. So what I need to do is to use the layers and turn that layer off, so that it now is over here. So now this needs to become a button. Now I want to make this into a button, and this button, it needs to have an action on it, which is to invoke. It needs to invoke the animation, which is of course called button 3. Now for some reason that moved, and I don't quite know why. I think I know why, because we'd actually removed the footnote before, so it was in a different position. Okay, so now let's now put the layer back on. Now I should emphasize that although we've hidden the layers, this won't actually work until we put that layer back. So the reason for having the strategy for having layers for these items that are going to animate onto the screen is that you can very quickly hide them away while you work on anything that's underneath, but you will need to bring it back on before you export to the ePub, or indeed have a look in the preview to see if this actually works. So I'm bringing my preview panel onto the screen, and I'm going to this particular page. And as you can see, as before, this now comes onto the screen automatically, which is not what we want, but at least it works when we click that button. So once again, we have to go back to this object, the one that is animating onto the screen, and we need to make sure that this object does not, the animation of this object does not the action is not on page load, so we turn that off. Now I'm also, before I move on just to check it out again, I also want to suggest that what you do with this object, if you double click it so you're selecting the actual object and rather than the button itself, and again, once again, if you use your effects, you can actually make this have a glow, an outer glow, and we can make it white or we can make it black. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to make this white, in fact. Yes, I think that's better. So let's have a look at this again. Okay, this time, as you can see, everything around it has disappeared. In fact, I can even click outside the image and this will now hide the image. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.